I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in the Office of Criminal Investigations, what the FDA does, and it's more of a working level kind of stuff. A little bit about myself. I had a brief introduction when we first started, just to refresh everybody's memory. I work for the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations, and OCI was started back in 1993. And the reason they set up their own Office of Criminal Investigations, prior to 1993, the FDA never had any capability of conducting their own criminal investigations for violations of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. It was kind of a wild system they had. In the FDA, the people who were really out on the front lines would be all the regulatory officers around the country. These are all the people who do the consumer safety issues and the regulatory investigations. And back in those days, if an FDA investigator was working out in the field, he was doing an inspection of a manufacturing plant that was producing pharmaceuticals or vaccines or foods. If he found something that wasn't right and he thought it might be criminal in nature, what this investigator would do is he would go ahead and he would write up his recommendations for further action. It would go to the district compliance officer. And the district compliance officer would take a look at it, and he would make a determination as to whether or not this was going to be criminal or if it was going to be a civil matter. And if it was criminal, then he would forward it to the appropriate center within the FDA that regulated that particular product. And then the chief counsel's office in that center would look at it. If they had any questions and they thought there was some merit to a criminal investigation, they would then send it up to the chief counsel's office in the FDA. And then the chief counsel's office, the entire FDA would take a look at it. And if they thought there was a little bit of merit in the case, then they would send it over to the Justice Department, to the Office of Consumer Litigation. And then if they thought it was okay, then they would send it out to the appropriate U.S. attorney in the district where this incident had taken place. Now, it worked, kind of. The only problem is, if anybody had a question anywhere along that line, they had to go all the way back down to each one of those steps to get the answers. So by the time they got around to prosecuting that case, they had a problem because all the witnesses have died of old age, and all the evidence is moldy, rotten, it's gone. So it didn't work out. So back in 1993, the FDA was at war. We were at war with the tobacco industry, and it made me happy again. And Dr. David Kessler decided he wanted to have some criminal investigative branch. So that's where we're coming from. That's how we were created. I came over to the FDA's Office of Criminal Investigations in 1996 after I retired from the Secret Service. I had 20 years of law enforcement experience with those folks. I worked a little bit of everything that the Secret Service works. I worked in protection end of it. I worked a lot of criminal investigations. I worked a lot of counterfeiting. I worked a lot of protective intelligence. And when I retired, I was the agent in charge of the counterterrorism section of our foreign intelligence branch. So I've got a lot of hands-on knowledge with the threat issues. And the people that we have working for us are along that same line. We don't hire new kids on the block. Every agent who works for us has already been working for another federal agency. We're kind of small. It says 91, I got to change that. It's really 93 for the guys that hit the road. 91 is when the concept came in and started. We've got about 29 offices around the country. We're spread pretty thin. We've got a total of 180 agents, and those agents come in from all the other law enforcement agencies. Like this one of us came in from the Secret Service. We've got people who spend time with the FBI, DEA, and EPA, and all the other law enforcement entities within the government. And it really serves us well because if you take a look at that map, we are spread very thin. And because our agents come from all these other agencies, if you're working out there in the middle of Montana and you need to get some help, you can stick your head in the office where you used to work and say, hey guys, can you give me a hand? And it generally works out pretty well. These are our investigative responsibilities. For us, it's the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That's what gets us in the door. That's what starts our criminal investigations. And it's a handful. Title 21 of the U.S. Code, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, only has one felony in it. And that one felony is what we call a prohibited act. And a prohibited act under the FD&C Act is the way you determine something is a prohibited act is if it's a misbranded or an adulterated product. And the way you determine if something is a misbranded or adulterated product is if it's in violation of the reams and reams and reams of federal regulations that go into food, drugs, cosmetics, anything that the FDA regulates. And the FDA regulates about 25% of the total commerce in the United States, and almost 50% of all the imports coming into the United States. So there's it's what we call a target ripe environment. I mean, it's never ending. Another big part of one of the reasons I'm probably here today, and one of the reasons we work so closely with the Bureau, is probably the next one is the Federal Anti-Tampering Act. You know, when we look at a threat against an FDA-regulated product, you know, to us it doesn't make any difference whether it's a criminal event or whether it's a terrorist event. It's a tampering. It's somebody's compromised one of our products. And the Federal Anti-Tampering Act was a law that was passed after the Tylenol incident in the early 90s. Early 90s. And that was before FDA was had their own criminal brand, but it's an incredible tool for us. If somebody merely threatens to have tampered with an FDA-regulated product, it's done. And if they've actually tampered with the product, they can go to jail for many, many years. So we work a lot of these tampers. Some of them, just between you and I, are absolute nonsense. About 95% of the cases that we open, the person who generally reports that tampering is generally the person who's responsible for it. And 99 times out of 100, to use a technical term, it's the village idiot who's actually looking for some type of monetary compensation from the manufacturers who produce the products. But you don't know it until you go out and work. And I'm going to just throw a few examples in as we go here. You know, when I was a brand new agent with the FDA, I worked out at the Metro Washington field office. We covered about 5 different states. And our office had received a call from the Havre de Grace, Maryland Public Health, and they said that they had a complaint that somebody had reported the tampering with the soft drink. You know, soft drink, that's the number one reported tampering product. And so being the new kid on the block, I said, I'll go out there and interview this guy. So I hopped in the car, I drove up to Havre de Grace. I found the guy who reported this thing. And this guy was a character. I mean, you know, you walk into the house, it's absolutely filthy. And I'm sure a lot of you folks have seen these kind of environments. And you walk in there, and the guy says, Mr. Hughes, would you like to have a seat? And I'm saying, nah, I've been in the car all day. The guy hasn't seen a shower or shave in God knows how long. And so we started to interview this guy. And I said, well, tell me the story. You know, how did it happen? Oh, I went to the convenience store. I purchased a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew. And I took a drink and it was okay. And then I realized, hey, I forgot the cigarettes. He goes to the store. He comes back, takes another drink, and he said, oh, Mr. Hughes, that's going to hit me. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I knew I was going to die. I said, well, what was the experience? He said, well, you know, it tasted just like urine. And because my question is, how do you know urine tastes like that? But they always give themselves away.